Our next storyteller drives a Subaru Forester. And when I was asking a little bit of information, storytellers come to us through friends, through people we know, through people who have been in the audience, and sometimes they just kind of appear. We get an email, I hear you do a storytelling thing. And Maine is such a wonderful small community. When I was asking the storyteller something interesting about him, he said he's the writer for a web series called Ragged Isle. I said, who's your director? And he said his name is Barry Dodd, who I went to high school with. Please welcome Greg Tulonen.
Okay, I'm in the passenger seat, and we are in the left-hand lane, hurtling towards oncoming traffic. At the wheel is my dad, his jaw clenched in rage. I am 9 years old and scared out of my mind. Before we get into a head-on collision, but not much before, we swerve back into the right-hand lane directly behind a candy red Ford Pinto, the object of my father's pursuit. Another gap opens in the left-hand lane, and my dad pulls up parallel to the candy red Ford Pinto and angrily gestures for the driver to pull over, which he does. My dad parks at an angle in front of him, leaps out of the car, runs up to him and says, "Hey, you threw a Burger King bag out your window back there." And the guy said, "Yeah." My dad said, "Okay, let's go. We're going back so you can pick it up." Now, the guy didn't know that my dad was serious. And the reason I know that is because he said, "What, are you serious?" And my dad said, "Yep, let's go. Make a U-turn. I'll follow you." So the guy made a U-turn, and we followed him back to where he had thrown his Burger King bag out the window. It was still there at the bottom of a gully by the side of the road. My dad supervised while the man kind of scuttled his way down to the bottom of the gully to retrieve the Burger King bag. There was some other trash down there, like some empty beer cans and cigarette packs. My dad said, "Yeah, pick those up too." And the guy said, "Well, I didn't throw that stuff." My dad looked at him. "Did I ask you if you threw it? Pick it up." So the guy picked it up, and he kind of awkwardly carried it all up the gully to the side of the road, and he stood in front of my dad, and he said, "What do you want me to do with this?" And my dad said, "Put it in your car, drive somewhere that has a trash can, and throw it in the trash. That's what you're supposed to do with trash." So the guy put all the trash into his car, and he drove away. Now, for all I know, as soon as he was out of sight, he threw everything out the window again. But as far as my dad was concerned, a wrong had been righted. You see, my dad was a middle school principal for 30 years, and he carried that role out into the world. If he saw a rule being broken, he would put a stop to it. If he saw an unfairness being committed, he would jump in to try to make it fair. Someone's talking in a movie theater, he makes that person shut up. The whole movie theater is being rowdy. He stands up in front of the whole movie theater and makes everybody calm down. One time, there was a guy smoking, if you can believe it, smoking in a movie theater in the seat next to my dad. This was a big, scary-looking guy. And my dad pokes him on the arm and says, "Put that cigarette out." The guy turned to him, and he said, "Don't you touch me. You touch me again, I'll put this cigarette out in your fucking face. How do you feel about that?" And my dad said, "I don't care where you put it out, just put it out." There was a kind of fearlessness with which my dad took on any perceived injustice, and that extended to politics, about which he was passionate. Once we were at a restaurant, and we were talking about an upcoming election, and he said very loud, "Republicans are assholes." And I said, "Okay, but because there could be Republicans, in this restaurant, maybe even at the next table." And he looked over at the next table, and he looked at me, and he said, "Good. They should know they're assholes." And look, on the off chance that there are Republicans here tonight, I don't mean any offense at all. And if my dad were here, he would absolutely want you to know you're an asshole. Now, I am not like my dad. I'm not confrontational. My instinct is to not be a source of tension. And if I encounter a conflict, my instinct is to smooth it over. Nevertheless, one time when I was in my 20s, I went to the movies with some friends. My dad was not with us. We bought our tickets, and the way this theater worked is you had to line up outside because it was too small to admit people before showtime. So we were first in line, and the line got longer and longer down the side of the building and around the corner. And as I got pretty close to showtime, people were still coming up to the box office and buying tickets. But I noticed that they weren't going to the back of the line. They were just sort of hanging out in front of the box office. And they were chatting and trying to be all casual, but it was clear to me that their plan was to rush the doors when the theater doors opened. And this was bugging me. I didn't say anything to them because I'm not my dad. But I did say to my friends, not trying to be overheard, just making conversation, I said, you know, if my dad were here, he would say, "All you people get to the back of the line." And I looked over at them, and they had heard me. And every single one of them was going to the back of the line. And I thought, whoa. This is what I thought. I thought, this is how my dad feels all the time. My dad loves that story. It's really his favorite thing I've ever told him. When my dad was 56, which is 7 weeks older than I am right now, he was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. I have a 50-50 chance of carrying the gene. If I do, I assume I'll find out pretty soon. One of the first things to go for my dad was language. He developed aphasia, which is the inability to speak or understand words and the inability to write or understand written words. I'm a writer. To me, this is devastating. I mean, language is what we use to simulate telepathy. Language is how I transmit my memories into your head. Without language, where are we? Well, with my dad, I discovered that communication is still possible through a touch, or a facial expression, or a gesture, or eye contact across a room. But if you've ever had a loved one suffer from Alzheimer's, you know that even that doesn't last. The disease just eats away at the person day by day by day until there's nothing left. I was thinking the other day about a time when I was 10 years old. My dad and I were in a drugstore. Up at the counter they were selling kites. These were just cheap plastic kites. My dad bought one on a whim. It came with 500 feet of string, which my dad declared was entirely inadequate. So our next stop was a hardware store where we bought a 10,000-foot filament. And this thing was, so it came on like a winch with a handle. We took it home and we threw away the 500-foot string, and we attached the filament to the kite. It was a pretty windy day, so we got it aloft pretty quickly. And then we stood on my dad's deck and we just let the wind take the kite. And it really took off. The handle on the winch was just spinning around like we were fishermen who had just caught a marlin. And my dad was holding the winch and I was holding the string, just grabbing onto it and letting go, grabbing onto it and letting go, and watching the kite just get higher and higher in the air. And the filament was just playing out so fast, it was burning my fingers. So my dad went in and he got some gloves, and at the end of the day, the fingers of those gloves had little grooves in them from when the filament had been flying by. I remember it was just so exciting to be holding on to something that was so far away, but so full of life. I mean, this kite was doing loop-de-loops in the air and just getting higher and higher and further away. And I was still holding on to it and letting go, holding on to it and letting it go. And it was just pulling against me, like with more strength than I thought possible. And then the kite went into a cloud and we couldn't see it at all anymore, but it was still pulling on us, and it was like a lion trying to break free. And then all at once the filament broke. And everything went slack. All that power I'd been holding on to just fell away to nothing. It was very startling. Now the kite was irretrievable. It was miles and miles away. I was not disappointed because my dad had been 100% right. The 10,000-foot filament was so much better than a 500-foot string. In the last years of his life, my dad reminded me a lot of that kite, just getting further and further and further away until I couldn't see him anymore. But I still felt that strength. I felt that connection, that filament between us, even when it was just that blank slate. And then 10 years ago, at the age of 67, my dad died. But nothing went slack. A few years back, I was driving to my wife's work to tell her that her father had died. And I heard my dad, just as clearly as if he were sitting in the passenger seat next to me, I heard him say, "You've got to be there for her, Greg. That's your job now." See, the connection hadn't broken. It wasn't a filament. It was something else, something stronger than the thickest steel cable, and a hell of a lot longer than 10,000 feet. Thank you.
Greg Tulonen.